quite does science reporting like the British tabloids. And let me be very clear when I say that that is a good thing. The United States definitely has its own unique way of doing bad science communication, but the Brits will always have a place in my heart for a particular brand of press release-ology, PR-ology, prology. Let's just go with prology. It's what happens when capitalism has sex with science and makes a baby, but by sex, it's not exactly consensual, and the baby doesn't really come out right. And you know what? This metaphor has become way too problematic, so I'm just going to move on. I lived in London for a short time, but I became quite adept at spotting prology, often from headlines alone, and that's how I managed to identify this one based upon a tweet from E! News. Robert Pattinson is the world's most beautiful man, according to science. I thought, wow, that's prology, and from an American outlet. Fun. So I clicked through, and the first line of the article was clear as day. In October of 2019, UK outlet The Daily Mail reported that Bella Hadid had been declared the most beautiful woman in the world. And now Robert Pattinson has been declared the most handsome man. Aha! And so my next thought was, I wonder who sent the press release to the Daily Mail to get this article placed, because I know it wasn't an actual peer-reviewed study performed by scientists. I mean, don't get me wrong, peer-reviewed science papers can and have been written about how it just so happens some generic-looking white man has the sexiest face of all time. But honestly, those are usually about the sexiest woman, and they're usually published in, like, evolutionary psychology journals, and the Daily Mail doesn't always get around to reading those. So I took a guess. Who would make money off of a story like this? Enough to bother putting out a press release. Sometimes it's random shit not even connected to the science story that they're hawking, like a grocery store or something. And sometimes it's a marketing firm that does surveys, and the science was a survey they did. But in this case, I guess that it would be something appearance-based, like an orthodontist or a plastic surgeon. Luckily, the name of the company that performed the scientific study is always mentioned in the Daily Mail article, because that's the entire point of the press release, to get your name read by millions of racists and morons. So I clicked through and checked out the good old Daily Mail, and I scrolled down until I came to the fourth sentence, which read, "The list was compiled using the latest computerized mapping techniques by Harley Street facial cosmetic surgeon Dr. Julian De Silva, who utilizes the technology in his work." The press release really did its job, because sentence 5 is, Dr. De Silva, who runs the Center for Advanced Facial Cosmetic and Plastic Surgery in London, said, Robert Pattinson was the clear winner when all elements of the face were measured for physical perfection. And yes, by the way, you may have picked up by now that the science being done here is computer mapping the face and comparing it to the golden ratio of beauty phi, or phi, which was, quote, the ancient Greeks' idea of perfection. The golden ratio, simply described, is when you take, let's say, a long and a short line segment, and you find that the ratio of the short one to the long one is the same as the ratio of the long one to both of them put together. That works out to about 1.618, but not exactly that, because it's an irrational number that just keeps going on forever, like pi. And that's it. Like, it doesn't actually have anything to do with beauty. I mean, I don't know, maybe you find those line segments to be particularly beautiful, or maybe you find a particular beauty in a 3x5 index card. Do you want to fuck a 3x5 index card? Because I guess you could roll it up into a little dildo, if that's what you're into. I'm not here to shame you for your phi kink. Okay, I'm being a little bit flippant. but just a bit. Phi, like pi, is found in nature, and it is interesting, and in some ways, yeah, it can be considered beautiful. It describes how, for instance, sunflower seeds are often packed together, and when converted to angles, it often describes how leaves on many plants will spiral around. This might be due to the fact that it's a very irrational number, meaning that if each leaf on a plant is spaced out according to phi, they will never stack up on each other and rob another leaf of sunlight. You're never going to really get two numbers, one after the other, that stack them up. It makes sense that plants that organize their leaves in this way will gather more sunlight and be more likely to live and to pass along their genes. And yes, many artists have, over the years, incorporated phi into their work in terms of canvas size, subject matter placement, and even building size. But people get really caught up in this stuff, and there are a lot of myths about it, like how everything in nature strictly adheres to phi as though it's a universal law. That's not true. Sorry. Like nautiluses, for instance, do not actually all adhere to the golden ratio. And you can't just slap a golden ratio rectangle spiral onto any image you want and call it perfect art. It's a prime idea for confirmation bias, for people who want to find a pattern in something and then believe that that pattern was intentional or has some greater meaning. Enter human beauty. Try as evolutionary psychologists might, no one has really found any universal standard of human beauty that resists the fads of ages and cultures. What scientists do find on occasion is a preference for certain looks within certain cultures, within certain time periods. In the US and UK, for instance, we tend to really love white people with their limp hair and thin lips and thin noses, thin bodies, pale skin, as well as people who might not be white but display some of the characteristics that we tend to associate with white people. And that makes sense because that's who we are mostly surrounded by. That's who makes our media. That's who stars in our media. It's just one big self-congratulatory circle jerk. Congrats on being white, Robert Pattinson. We find you attractive. Elsewhere, a culture might prefer thick lips, thick bodies, thick hair, thick noses. Sometimes within those cultures, those preferences change slightly. Maybe we go through a phase of liking fat asses, but on a white body. That's just how it works. Hell, just look at my eyebrows. I've had the same bushy-ass eyebrows for my entire life. And some years, people try to tease me about it. Some years, I don't hear a peep about them. They go in and out of style. Like, in the 80s, they were in. In the 90s, they were out. In the 2000s, they were so out they were not to be spoken of, especially not in public. In the 2010s, they just weren't boxy enough. But hold on, boys. Makeup.com says that for the 2020s, they're back, baby! Eyebrows are a crucial part of how your face looks to others and should definitely be considered in any kind of complex ratio you're forming, but they can change and society changes so that there's no way that one look is always going to be considered eternally beautiful. Though, from some of the ways I've seen people shove the golden ratio onto images, I bet it's possible that each one that the researcher in question finds beautiful will still in some way be considered phi. Because, like I said, it's ripe for being able to fit into whatever circumstances you prefer. Does an otherwise beautiful face not adhere to your phi standards? No problem, just measure more angles, add more data until you find it. Let's say that this plastic surgeon who's advertising his plastic surgery business is right, and that phi can measure universal beauty. Does that mean that Robert Pattinson is the most beautiful man? Fuck no. Who else did this guy study? He only includes 10 men, and he doesn't bother to tell us how he picked those, although we obviously know, or who else he might have looked at. Probably nobody. Because, again, this isn't an actual scientific study, it's a press release. That's why, as the E! News article mentions, the same plastic surgeon said that Bella Hadid was the most beautiful woman back in October of 2019, followed by Beyonce. But 3 years prior, the same plastic surgeon said that Amber Heard, Kim Kardashian, and Kate Moss were the most beautiful. Did Beyonce not exist in 2016? Or did this guy just look at whatever celebrities are hot right now and put their names in a press release to sell his business? Ah, prology. Anyway, I've beaten up this study enough. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe despite all this, beauty really does correlate with the golden ratio. And it just so happens that the Daily Mail includes a guide for how to find your ratio. So I figure why not test it on a random person we all know? Like, let's go with Mark Zuckerberg. Let's see. He has a nose length of 87.3 pixels, a width of 52.1 pixels, giving him a nearly perfect golden ratio of 1.67. That's the 97th percentile. And an eyebrow score of 1.6. That's the 99th percentile. And lips of 1.69, the 96th percentile, making him way hotter than Robert Pattinson. You know, I always assumed it was Zuck's haircut or his personality that made him so wildly attractive, but no, it's his perfect face. His perfect golden ratio face is what gets everyone so unbelievably fucking horny for Mark Zuckerberg. Look at that face. You know you want it. You can't deny it. It's science.